Good evening. I'm Ruta Shabazi in for Marnie Hughes tonight, and we begin with breaking news. Fears of a war growing in Ukraine as Russian leader Vladimir Putin orders troops into the eastern part of the country. Those troops now in two separatist territories in Ukraine that Putin is now recognizing as independent, inching closer and closer to the capital of Kiev. The U.S. says it has strong intelligence that Putin is planning an attack on Kiev any day now. And tonight, international emergency action as both Putin and Ukraine's president address the world. The White House also responding. In a moment, we'll be speaking with retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton and journalist Joseph Lindsley, who is in Ukraine right now. But first, we want to start with correspondent Kelly Meyer. She is live in Washington, D.C. tonight. And Kelly, this is Russia's biggest action against Ukraine in years.
Ruta, this certainly is taking this conflict to a whole new level. Putin effectively taking control over a large portion of eastern Ukraine, ratcheting up tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Tonight, the UN Security Council calling for an emergency meeting, and they're watching both the U.S. and allies for what Putin does next. Tonight, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordering troops into two regions in eastern Ukraine, launching what Moscow is calling a peacekeeping operation just hours after Putin recognized the breakaway regions as independent. Putin addressing the nation Monday, airing his grievances, saying Ukraine has always been a part of Russia.
The Secretary General considers the decision of the Russian Federation to be a violation of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine.
Tonight, the White House calling Putin's lengthy address a speech you give to justify war. The Biden administration responding swiftly to Putin's move, issuing limited sanctions, banning new investment, trade, and financing in the regions. The White House noting these are separate sanctions from the severe ones it will impose should Russia invade. President Joe Biden agreeing in principle to a meeting with the Russian leader only if Putin doesn't invade further. The White House saying time and place aren't set and will come after Secretary of State Antony Blinken meets with his Russian counterpart this Thursday. It's unclear if all of this is off the table as Russian troops prepare to move in. And Ruta, the White House facing backlash tonight for not issuing sanctions as Russian troops deploy to these territories. Critics saying Biden should impose sanctions now. A senior administration official saying tonight some sanctions could come as early as tomorrow. Ruta.
And Kelly, U.S. officials and our allies are saying diplomacy is still not off the table, right? There is that meeting scheduled for the 24th between Biden, Putin, and Macron, for example.
That's right. They are still waiting to see. We don't know yet if that meeting between Blinken and Lavrov will come, and then thereafter the Biden and Putin summit. We are waiting to hear if those are still on the table. And I think this all comes down to whether the U.S. and allies see this as an invasion tonight. A senior administration official telling us Russian troops moving into Donbass, the region there, isn't a new step, saying Russia has had forces there for the last 8 years since the two regions broke off in 2014. And the Biden administration is clearly weighing issuing sanctions against Russia very carefully here as to not escalate the situation. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying as soon as you trigger the sanctions, any deterrence effect is gone. But an administration official saying tonight the U.S. will continue to pursue diplomacy until the tanks roll in. Ruta Bay.
All right, Kelly Meyer for us. Thank you. And we want to bring in now retired Lieutenant General Richard Newton. He has 34 years of experience with the U.S. military, leading soldiers through times of crisis. Thank you so much for making the time for us tonight. First, I want to just start with what constitutes an invasion from a military point of view.
Well, good evening, Ruta Bay. Again, we are as near an invasion as we possibly can be. There is an extraordinary strategic brinkmanship going on here in all capitals, in NATO, in the United States, and certainly in Moscow. What constitutes an invasion is you're going to see armed forces roll across the border. And what I would expect, again, if he goes full force in an invasion, you're going to see a blitzkrieg-like invasion that not only in terms of ground forces, but air forces as well. That will also be in parallel with a massive cyber attack that will go after the Kiev government, Zelensky's eyes and ears, if you will, as president of Ukraine, but also the power grid as well. So on that, it'll be swift, it'll be highly offensive, and it'll be deliberate. And there will be no question in anybody's mind that an invasion is happening. They're already been under attack But a full-scale invasion, to me, seems just about ready to kick off.
Well, right, because we're already seeing forces cross the border.
Yeah, that's obviously happening. But in terms of the brunt of the forces of 150,000 to 270,000 troops, as well as some elements of their air power, that hasn't happened yet. And I know the administration is trying to ward off as best it possibly can to wait for that last moment of diplomacy. But we're going to see. I think that moment's going to slip by, and then we're going to have to respond with severe sanctions, of course. But also, we're going to have to make sure that we keep the NATO treaty and the NATO pact together, and that, again, should it spill over beyond the Ukrainian borders into NATO, that's when it becomes extraordinarily difficult. And in a situation where one attack on one NATO member is an attack on all of them, including the United States. We're not there yet. I'm not suggesting that's going to happen, but again, it could. Let's take it one step at a time. But again, I'm much more pessimistic than I was on Friday night when we talked. But at this point, it appears that an invasion is imminent.
You think the chances of diplomacy have passed? Has that ship sailed?
I never say never. By the way, I'm down here in Jupiter Beach, Florida. I'm not in Washington, D.C., and I'm certainly not in the capitals over in NATO. Let's just say that there's no one sleeping in the capitals tonight in NATO as well as the United States. They will go up to the last possible moment to see if some diplomatic action. Now, let's step back just a little bit. Putin, having said that he's going to send in, peacekeepers, which is really Russian forces, Soviet in his mind. That is, to me, extraordinary. It's a slap in the face to the Biden administration, to the president himself, as well as to the NATO allies. And one more point. If you look at tomorrow, February 22nd, 8 years ago, Vice President Biden was in the Obama administration. And that's exactly when Putin invaded Crimea. That's when he annexed Crimea. And so I'm a history major, and Putin is a huge student of history. So it doesn't fall short on me in terms of what his sense of timing is from a historical standpoint. And then on the 23rd is the Defender of the Fatherland Day, which is essentially the Soviet Army Day as well. And so there's some historical precedence, there's some historical reasoning in terms of what he's doing, but you just can't trust him. He's a despot of the worst kind. And so if we try to think in terms along Western geopolitical strategic play here, it just doesn't set with us in terms of how to determine what he's going to do next.
That is such an interesting point to point out. Let's talk quickly about the separatists. What did they want? Let's talk about the regions, how tense they are, and what they actually want. Putin obviously now supporting them.
Well, they're puppets, if you will, of Putin, of Russia, and they just want that from a historical standpoint. They speak the language, and it was back in the day, I think back in the Khrushchev era, back in the early 60s, when he essentially signed off that part of eastern Ukraine from Russia, the old Soviet Union and so forth. But they want to be separate and apart. And so that they've been, again, my data tells me, and Joseph may have more information than I do, but up to 14,000 Ukrainians have actually died in those conflict in those two areas of the Donbass region. So there's been several years of almost like guerrilla war fighting there, of separatists wanting to separate themselves from Ukraine, which Putin will use as a pretext, for an invasion. His pretext is to send in, quote, peacekeepers, but he's really sending in, Russian forces to create a demilitarized or a zone, if you will, that now is beginning to break off part of Ukraine into Russia. His aim is not just that separatist area, though. His aim is to put the entire nation of Ukraine in Russia, which is, by the way, the second largest landmass in Europe. And so it's significant, I believe, that he's starting with that area with known separatist movements for the last several years in favor of Russia. And so it's out of his playbook. Of course, he would start there.
All right, General Newton, thank you so much for your expertise, breaking it all down for us, helping us understand it. We appreciate having you tonight.
Thank you.
Joe Lindsley is an American journalist and editor of Lviv Now in Ukraine. He is joining us live tonight. First, let's start with the big headline today. Putin's fiery speech declaring parts of Ukraine independent, sending in Russian forces. Ukrainians have been living with this tension, as the general just pointed out, for 8 years now, exactly 8 years. What is the mood and the reaction there tonight?
Well, Rudabeh, it was initially, right after that speech, incredibly tense. And my phone was sort of blowing up with messages from friends in Washington and also from Ukrainian friends. And first I'll say I came here 2 years ago just for 2 weeks to give a lecture, and then I got stuck when the pandemic started. And I've been here for 2 years, and I ended up choosing to be here. And so I've had 2 years to really understand the Ukrainian people and how Russia has been a threat for these past 8 years. And tonight, of course, it's the most serious level that I've ever seen. I ask every Ukrainian I speak with, how does this moment compare with 2014? And I still get mixed answers. It depends on people's experiences and where they were in the country during the days and weeks after the revolution of 2014. And so I think it's a strange scene in Lviv right now. For example, there are, we've heard warnings about Russia already preparing a list of Ukrainians they want to target should they take over the city. It seems to be confirmed, and you would all have to please check this, but there is perhaps the U.S. Embassy was thinking of leaving for just a couple of days right now from Lviv, where they've been sort of safely away from Kyiv. That's what everyone is hearing here. And also, almost everyone I know comments in the city how there are all kinds of new people here, new people that we sort of see in the same places that we go to all the time. There's a very strange atmosphere. But the most important thing, or the craziest thing from tonight was President Putin's speech, in which he made the case to erase the history of Ukraine as an independent country. And I think here we see, and even talking with friends after that speech, everyone was sort of defending the history of Ukraine. But one thing that we sort of stepped back, and I stepped back and said, Putin is a master crafter of narratives. And just as the Chinese government will never mention Tiananmen Square, Vladimir Putin will never mention the Euromaidan revolution. And that was the moment when the people of Ukraine said, we will not have a puppet government from Moscow. We choose to be independent. Actually, as the general was talking about dates and how Putin is a student of history, 2 days ago on Sunday was the anniversary of the Heavenly Hundred. It was when the secret police of the Moscow-backed government in Kyiv in 2014 began to fire upon the protesters in 2014. So it's a very sacred day for Ukrainians. This is sort of a sacred week of memory for Ukrainians. 8 years ago this week is when they finally, I think would be tomorrow, is when the regime fled to Russia. And so I think as we talk about this, President Putin will never mention the revolution of dignity. But I think we in the West should keep in mind that maybe that is part of his motive, is to stop free people, many of whom speak Russian. If Ukrainians who speak Russian and Ukrainian can be free, why can't Russia? And if I could just add on the point of we're talking about the separatists and the breakaway regions, I would like to see a lot more, and I would like to do this myself as well, reporting on what has happened there. But in the days after the revolution, Russia made a ploy. They took Crimea, and they tried not only to get the Donbass, but also to get the cities of Odessa, of Kharkiv, and Dnipro. They failed to get those big cities because the citizens stood up. They succeeded in getting the Donbass. But since then, almost, I think 1.6 million, according to the Ukrainian government, people have fled that region. It used to have some thriving cities, industrial cities. It no longer does. So it's not even a pleasant place to live. But right now, when we see we hear the headline that Russia has crossed the border into Ukraine. I think we have to be very precise. Russia has crossed the border. It's a territory that it has in some ways influenced and controlled already for 8 years. There's good evidence that Russian special forces have been fighting in those regions already for these past 8 years. So here, I think we need a lot more reporting to look at what happened in 2014. But also to be careful in the terminology that, Russia has not yet invaded Ukrainian government-controlled territory. And then that's a big thing to keep in mind.
All right. Well, you bring up a good point, and it is so important to have people on the ground such as yourself. Do Ukrainians support a meeting between Biden and Putin?
I think almost every Ukrainian I talk to, that doesn't even come into their mind. I think, and right now, I get this sort of fierce sense of independence from Ukrainians. They know they might have to fight, and they're ready to do so. And some Ukrainians, I would say, would like some clarity on this and clarity even, and this is the difficult thing, but people tell me this, even if it means they have to fight, because this long sort of, fake war of threats since November, but even these past 8 years has done so much to damage this country. The people earned their freedom in 2014. They made lots of progress, and especially these past months, again, we've seen, I know people who've lost clients from America because they're afraid that the country would lose internet. So some Ukrainians actually would like to see this stop somehow. But there's a great level right now of distrust here for regimes all over the world.
I can understand why. Well, thank you so much for your reporting on the ground there. 2 years later, still haven't left. Joe Lindsley, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good morning. Good night.
Good morning and good night to you as well.
Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.